Our next keynote speaker works at MathSpace and also works on CodeEO. CodeEO, and he is also the creator of the popular CMS framework based on Django, which is Mezzanine. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Stephen McDonald.
Hello. Hi. So my name's Stephen McDonald. I come from Sydney, Australia, and today I'm going to talk about a project called Mezzanine, which is a content management system built for Python and Django. Just first up, I'd like to thank the organisers. I've never been to any kind of PyCon before, let alone actually speak at one, so thanks a lot. It's a real privilege to be here. So yeah, just a bit of background. A content management system, if you're not aware of what that is, it's basically like a system for building dynamic websites that the manager of the website can log into an administrative area and update the content on the website and things like that. WordPress is a really sort of popular example of a content management system, and a lot of people compare Mezzanine to WordPress. They say it's the WordPress of the Python space. If you don't know what Django is, it's like one of the most popular web development frameworks for Python. If you don't know what Python is, get out. You shouldn't be here. So yeah, the talk will basically, I'll go through a few parts. First up, I'll just talk about the background leading up to why we build Mezzanine, some of the distinguishing characteristics of Mezzanine, and how it's actually implemented in Django terms, and then we'll look at some of the features it gives you and the ecosystem that's around it. So first up, just a bit about myself. I've been a developer since the late 90s when the internet really took off. I've been in the web development space, system administration, DevOps, everything around that. That's my only real sort of qualification being here, is I've been doing this stuff for a really long time. I've worked with a lot of programming languages, databases, different platforms and things like that. And in the last 8 years or so, I've really focused on Python and Django. I think it's a really fantastic way to do web development. These days, I work at a couple of startups. First one's called MathSpace.co, and we provide this really sophisticated application to high schools that allows teachers to basically teach math students at a high school level. And it really goes beyond the competitors in this space that might provide sort of simple multiple choice type questions, yes, no, right, wrong. We have like a mathematical parsing engine that can give students really fine-grained feedback. We use machine learning techniques to sort of guide them through a dependency graph of different mathematical topics and things like that. My other startup I'm working on, this is my pride and joy, it's CodeEO. It's a really slick RSS reader that if you're a big user of Google Reader and they shut down, a lot of new RSS readers cropped up, and this is one of them. And my third job is another full-time job, is developing Mezzanine and maintaining all the contributions and the community around that and things like that. And that's just a brief sort of visual overview of what Mezzanine is. You have this administrative interface for managing all the content and different aspects of a website. And what you can see on the right there is the default Mezzanine website that you get out of the box, just saying welcome, and here are some links that will point you in the right direction. So all of these projects that I'm working on, I've put the little Python logos here. This is all Python and Django based. The startups, the open source stuff, it's all Python and Django. It's a great space to be working in for web development with Python. There's nothing really that can compare to it at the moment, I think. So now I'm going to talk about the background leading up to building Mezzanine and why would I go and build another CMS. Like there's WordPress, there's a gazillion CMSs in the PHP space, there's some these days in the Django space, and you know they're really a dime a dozen. If I was to sit down today, I probably wouldn't build another CMS. So for me to justify doing that, I'll talk a little bit about my CMS story. So this is going back a few years, 2002. I started working at this place called a digital agency, which is a really fancy name for a web development shop that focuses on really high-name consumer brands, so B2C type websites, very content-heavy websites, e-commerce, but their real core capabilities were marketing and branding, right? So really strong visual design in all the web work they were doing. And so I started there as a developer, and I was working on the back end of all these sites, CMS sites, e-commerce sites. Now, while their marketing and their branding skills were like top-notch, their sort of technical skills were really simplistic and a little bit crude. So I started working on CMS projects there, and each of the approach for doing each of these CMS sites was basically take a whole bunch of ASP files from the previous website, and for each section in the CMS, copy and paste a listing script and an edit script and an add script and a delete script with SQL queries directly embedded in those, and copy and paste those and find and replace all the table names and change the form fields manually. And it had this very simplistic charm to it, right? Like web development these days, we have to go through so many layers of MVC frameworks and deployment and things like that. And this was really simple, but it was kind of boring, and it was quite laborious as well. And so I worked with that for a couple of months and sort of said, we can do better than this. We can sort of abstract out some of the variable aspects of this and really productize it. And so I took the initiative at that time to start doing that, and the company was really on board with that. And so I went for a few years sort of doing lots of different broad range of CMS sites, e-commerce sites, and really developed an appreciation for the wide range of content requirements that can come along with all sorts of different types of sites, and the way to manage all this big spectrum of different types of contents in a really holistic way in a single system that we can provide as CMS to these really high, like #1 brands in my country, Australia, that are paying an inordinate amount of money for these CMS projects. And so I developed that, and that worked really well for a while. And then along came Django, and I'm the kind of guy, right? I mean, I mostly work on Python these days, but I don't call myself a Python developer, right? I love looking at different programming languages, different databases, operating systems, things like that, right? I'm always looking to broaden my horizons and perspectives and work out different and better ways for building these online systems. So I think it was about 2005 I started looking at Python and just fell in love with it. It just spoke to me in terms of elegance and batteries included and things like that, and it was really great. And at the same time, Django was just coming out. It was before Django 1.0, and so it was early days in the Django space, which is a big key here to why we built Mezzanine. And it really appealed to us in terms, I don't know if you're familiar with Django or not, but one of the real selling points of Django is it provides you this admin interface that you can really quickly get up and running. You develop your database models, and in a very minimal amount of code, you can have this back-end administrative interface for your website that the managers can log into, and it's really sort of a CRUD interface, listing records, add, edit, delete, that kind of thing. And the Django admin, it really mirrored what I'd been doing in these private CMS projects, where I learnt how to just create a single system that does CRUD apps and configure it for a whole bunch of different sections. So that really drew me to Django. And so I was the tech lead at that time, and I was sort of looking, how can we stop using our internal CMS, which was my pride and joy, and start using Python and Django. A major, throughout those years, I was developing all these CMS sites. Before Django, I developed a real appreciation for different types of content that can come along. And I learnt over time that there's really two ends of the spectrum of content that I've sort of described here. You've got this hierarchical tree, so you can imagine a real sort of content-heavy site with thousands of pages on it. You know, you've seen them before, a website with a primary navigation section, and you click on one of those and it's got secondary navigation down the left-hand side, and for really big, crazy content sites, you might click on one of those and there's tertiary levels of navigation. So layers and layers of navigation managing thousands of pages of sites. So you've got that real sort of tree structure there, versus on the other end of the scale, just straight lists, right? So things like a blog app where you list all these blog posts, all sorts of things like that, like products in a shop, events, things like that. And so all websites generally fall within somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, right? And some systems do the tree thing really good. Some systems do the list type data really good, but it's hard to do them all in a holistic way. Which our own internal CMS did quite well, so we'd evolved that over years. And so how could we do that in Django is what we were asking ourselves. And just a reminder that this critique of the Django ecosystem, it's 6 or 7 years old we're going back to, so things might have changed quite a bit since then, and they certainly have with Mezzanine. But we looked at a couple of projects. One was called Pinax, which was really ahead of its time, and Pinax, it's very similar conceptually to Mezzanine in that Django is a web development framework. It's comprehensive. It's a monolithic framework, right? It gives you every tool you're going to need to build a website, but it does not give you a website at all. You still have to build all that from scratch. And so what Pinax was trying to do was provide all the different applications, the blogging and the photos and the user profiles and following other users on a website, and give you all those features in a holistic way. But they really sort of developed that from the bottom up, where you had all these apps, but you were responsible for like trying to glue them together in a holistic way. So that worked well, and it was really cool. But it didn't have this notion of content hierarchy, the real tree side of things. It was real sort of this list type thing. The other project we looked at back then was a thing called Django Page CMS, which really was the tree. It's, here's your navigational structure of a website and how you can manage that. But it was early days. It was kind of brittle. It really needed heavy caching, which didn't really suit our taste. Like, we kind of saw that as a band-aid for performance. And it introduced some concepts that weren't specific to Django. You had to learn its own API of doing things, and that's a point that I'm going to talk about quite a bit today in terms of one of the characteristics of Mezzanine. It's just Django. You use normal Django concepts for building your Mezzanine website. So we combined those two projects, and we had private forks of them, and we hacked them up, and we changed them for each different project, and that worked well. But we had a really big problem in that in terms of a beautiful enterprise CMS, we were still providing just the simple Django admin for these really expensive big name clients, and it wasn't up to scratch, and every single project we did was different. So we didn't have a way of giving the owners of these websites who were paying us lots and lots of money a really beautiful, holistic CMS interface for managing all the data between these different types of things. So at the time, the manager, he said, you know, Django's really cool and it's cutting edge and it's up there in terms of the web technology, but it's not really cutting it in terms of what our clients are expecting. So maybe we might start using WordPress for some smaller sites and things like that. And you know, that was a fair call at the time, you know, like trying to do the best thing for the customer and things like that. But I was the tech lead, and I basically just said, we're not going to do that. That'd be a really step backwards, going back to PHP and hacking WordPress plugins and things like that. And I just said no. I said, look, I'm going to put on my programming hat. I'm going to go away for a weekend, and I'll come up with something built with Django that's like WordPress, and it's consistent and it looks good, and it allows us to bring all these different types of content together in a really holistic way, not just this hodgepodge of different applications. So I knocked that out in a weekend. It was just so basic, like it was very crude, but it was a great starting point. And I sort of developed that over the next month or so for a couple of different projects we were working on, and then released it as open source. And so Mezzanine was born, and I've just put that short URL there because the underlying one is really long, and that's case sensitive as well, by the way. But that points to the original commit from 5 years ago or so of when I first open sourced Mezzanine. And I was talking to Ken Bolton, who's this superstar in the Mezzanine community. He really helps out with the support and everything like that. And I can't remember how it came up, but we were looking at that original commit from 5 years ago, and it was hilarious, right? Because you can skim read this thing in 5 minutes or so. There's not much to it. But if you wanted to give someone a quick overview of the architecture of Mezzanine today, it maps that commit from 5 years ago, and it's like there's 100 times more code around that, but the structure has held true over those 5 years. And the project's grown to like over 200 contributors and thousands of mailing list subscribers and followers on GitHub, and hundreds, if not, we only know about a few hundred, but thousands of sites potentially. I mean, I just met people here at the conference who, we've built Mezzanine sites, I didn't even know about them. And I said to Ken, I said, you know, either we're really stubborn or the design works really well because it's held true for 5 years. And the truth is probably it's a little bit of both. So that's the background of why we built Mezzanine. We were there in the Django space very early on. We really wanted to use Python. We really wanted to use Django. We were accustomed to providing really slick CMS projects to really high-paying customers, and we couldn't do it with Django without something like Mezzanine. And it solved that problem back then, and it still solves that problem today. It's very valid. So next up, I'm going to talk a bit about the sort of characteristics that define the way Mezzanine works and the design of it. And it's a really sort of good perspective on distinguishing it from other projects in the same space, CMS and e-commerce projects, particularly in the Django space. So I follow this guy on Twitter, Benjamin Black, and I think he's a really switched-on guy, and I think he was involved in the original sort of Amazon EC2 architecture. So he's on this whole nother level in terms of like web development versus scaling these gigantic systems. But he made this quote on Twitter, and it really sort of resonated with me, and especially around Mezzanine and the user experience of it and the way it's implemented. And he says you make different things if you focus on the constraints of what you're providing and what are the lines that are drawn and how far are you going to go with that, versus looking at the requirements, which is the stock standard way you approach building these things, right? You get a list of requirements, you sit there, you build them. And I think this is a really highly applicable idea, especially in the user experience of a CMS. And so, and just leading into that, there's a really good question. Who is the architect of a CMS experience? Is it us, the programmers who are implementing a Django project? Is the CMS powerful enough and enterprise enough for a well-trained, non-technical user to go into the CMS and create the architecture themselves? And I think, that latter case where, you have some CMS projects where they provide drag and drop blocks and you can develop your own content types within the CMS yourself and you can configure those, and there's a steep learning curve for the non-technical user, but they're very empowering, right? But you can lead to sites that are just a big mess, right? They're not especially experts in building websites. So you can get a bit of a mess, and there's a lot of training involved in the CMS project. I personally think that a person who's new to a CMS project as a manager of content should be able to log into that CMS and intuitively be able to manage the content without thinking about it. And so on the other end of the scale, we have the developer who works closely with their customer that they're building the CMS website project for, and they can work out exactly what the content requirements are for that website, and the developer can craft the CMS experience to map the content requirements for the website precisely, and what you get is a perfectly tuned CMS that constrains the content manager from doing anything silly and from really disrupting the design and the structure of the website itself. And coming back to Mezzanine's roots in a digital agency where branding and design is of the utmost importance, we had to build these projects that did not let users corrupt that design, for lack of a better term. So Mezzanine is all about the constraints. There are CMS projects out there that empower you to do so much, and Mezzanine isn't trying to do that. It's to empower the developer to constrain the things that the CMS manager can do to keep a beautifully looking site intact. The next characteristic I want to talk about is something that Mezzanine's constantly striving for, and that's simplicity. And so how do we do that? And the key is we stick to straight Django concepts, right? There are projects in the Django space that they're doing content management, they're doing e-commerce, and you have to sit there, and again, you have to be trained up on how to build content in these systems. They have their own APIs, they have their own documentation for doing things like that, and Mezzanine tries very hard to just present straight Django concepts. So in Django you have these ORM classes that map to SQL database tables. You have a templating language for displaying your templates. You have these view functions that glue those two things together. And when you're working with Mezzanine, you are just working with these concepts. You don't have to go and learn anything else, any other sort of complicated plugin architecture or anything like that. And so for the savvy Django developer, Mezzanine is very natural. It's very quick to pick up. You create a Django model that might be a blog post, for example. You define what the fields of that are in your model class. You create a view function, you create a template, and this is just how you would do it in a normal Django project without Mezzanine. It's just that Mezzanine gives you a whole sort of kitchen sink of utilities to sort of expedite that process. So Mezzanine, these abstract characteristics that define it and distinguish it, I believe, against other projects in the space. It's the constraints. It's heavily focused on the constraints, the simplicity, and it is really just Django. I missed a point back there, but 9 out of 10 questions that come up on the Mezzanine mailing list they're not mezzanine specific, they're Django questions. And this is a problem for us, right? Because we don't want to duplicate the fantastic Django documentation. Our community is a tiny portion of the whole Django community where there's tens of thousands of mailing list subscribers, right? So unfortunately we say, oh, just go and look at the Django documentation. Here are the concepts you need to learn. And we have this big flashing block at the top of the mezzanine documentation. All of this documentation assumes that you know Django. If the concepts in it aren't going to make sense if you don't know Django. So this is really a project to expedite developing Django sites, and you need to know Django. So next up I want to talk about the implementation, how we actually take Django. And this is the most technical part. So if you don't know Django, you should be able to hang in there because it's not too deep. So I'll talk about how we actually model the content and how we sort of come up with the admin interface, which is really an interesting topic. So Mezzanine is Lego, right? We have all these tiny little abstract models that you can bring together, and yay, Python multiple inheritance, right? It's great. We use this really sort of classic object-oriented approach of here's a little class that does this, here's a little class that does this, here's a little class that does this. Bring 2 of those together if you want, bring 3 of those together if you want, and craft your types of content using that. Now, you might not actually be exposed to all these little building blocks because we come up with some main ones that leverage all those, and these are the ones that you generally want to deal with. And there's 2 main building blocks that I'll talk about, and these 2 main building blocks, they map back directly to that diagram I had before of the tree interface versus with hierarchical data versus the list interface, which is a bit more simplistic. So for that list interface, we have this model called displayable, and it's simply data, right? It doesn't have any special actual website features, which we'll talk about in a sec for something else. But displayable, it just gives you search integration, it gives you URL creation for the model you're creating, publishing dates, things like that, ownership by other users, all these features that just form the baseline of, okay, I want to create an event type of thing, I want to create a blog post type of thing, I want to create a product, right? These are all things that have a URL and they have a title and they might have some dates when you want to publish them and things like that. So that's displayable, it's quite simple, a lot of people never actually touch it. Back to the tree, and this, we have the other type, which is the page model, and this is, I mentioned before that there's no special Mezzanine API, and I told a little white lie. This is as much of an API as we have, is this page model, subclassing it. And this is the crux of dealing with Mezzanine and taking Mezzanine and really personalizing it and building a CMS experience for your customer. You simply take this page model from within Mezzanine and you subclass it. And these are Django models, and I've put pass against each of these because I didn't want to fill it up too much, but you define the attributes of what each of these types of contents are. This rich text page, for example, I mean, these are actually examples that come out of the box with Mezzanine, but the rich text page, it just defines a big WYSIWYG field, right? The form page is, and so that's a very simplistic example of a content type in Mezzanine. And because this is all just Django models and Django view functions and Django templates, right? The sky is the limit. Django is so powerful, you can take all these Django concepts and you can absolutely go berserk with the types of Mezzanine pages you're creating. The rich text page, it's dumb. It's got a title, it's got a WYSIWYG editor. The form page, it's absolutely advanced. You actually go into the admin interface and you create the form and you specify, you can actually drag and drop the different field types that are going to be on the form. So I can create an email address field, what's your favorite color field, and I can put in the options for red, green, blue, and I can have a default value for that. I can specify the contents of an email that someone will receive when they fill out this form. I can then in the the Mezzanine admin interface, I can I can extract the data from everything that's submitted via these forms into CSV files. I can drill down on the individual fields that I've added to it, and this is all non-technical, right? The CMS manager can come in there and do this and build something simply like a contact form versus an elaborate competition that they're going to draw prizes for and things like that. And that's all built using straight Django concepts. We extend the admin, which is actually Django admin. We create our own view functions for that, and it's a really advanced content type. So the spectrum from simple to complex is huge in terms of these different content types that you can create. So you create these models, and that defines what a content type is going to look like. You then create a corresponding HTML template that then knows how to deal with an instance of one of these models, and you can construct how that's going to look. And that's actually it. That's how you create your mezzanine site and all the different types of content that you provide to your customer. And a special bonus with mezzanine, and this is something I think a lot of other projects in the space struggle with, is, and I'll talk about this a lot more in a moment, but there's a huge ecosystem of Django applications out there that have nothing to do with mezzanine, and they implement their templates and their view functions and things like that. You can point these pages directly to Django applications in a mezzanine/Django project. So the sky is the limit, right? Mezzanine can just be your starting point, and you can go away and collect all the different utilities and Django apps you need in the third-party ecosystem, bring them in and hook them up to these different pages. And this is a problem that we've applied copious amounts of effort into solving, because it's like, how do I like mezzanine? It's a whole Django project. How do I integrate the Django ecosystem into that? And we do that really well. And so yeah, I mean, you can see here. This is an example. I showed this before, but this is one screen within the mezzanine admin interface, and you can see this is sort of hopefully looks like a tree interface, right? And you can see the pages, and you can see that drop down at the bottom there, and off each page in the tree that you can see the list of those content types coming straight out there. So you just develop these models, set up the templates, and it's all there. And I don't have another screenshot, but if you were to add one of these, it'll go straight through into the editing interface for that particular type of content. Publish it, it's done. It's a very simplistic workflow, and the savvy Django developer can pick this up very quickly without learning mezzanine-specific concepts. So yeah, that's how we implement the content. Next up, I will talk about the actual interface a bit, and this is a big topic. There's CMS projects in the Django space. There's e-commerce projects in the Django space. I've worked for companies, and they make a mistake, and I've worked for companies where I've had to fight for them to not make this mistake as well. And so again, this assumes a bit of Django knowledge, but coming back to the Django admin, it's great out of the box with Django. It gives you this CRUD interface. It's very fast to get that up and running quickly, but a lot of people say it's too simplistic. It was designed in 2005 or something. It looks a kind of Spartan, which is a fair comment, and it doesn't really match a CMS experience, right? It's just CRUD. It's just lists of data, add, edit, delete, and I feel it's a form of laziness, right? To sit there and say, and the problem I'm talking about is to sit there and say, we don't want to use Django admin for this project. We're going to create our own management interface for a CMS or an e-commerce store or whatever. And that's fine, right? It's really cool. It's fun to do something new. It's fun to build something from scratch. It's good if you can map your administrative interface directly to the problem you're solving. But I think it's a big mistake, because if you've worked with Django admin long enough, I can testify that you can make it do whatever it is you need it to do. You can completely reskin it, right? This looks nothing like, if you've seen Django admin before, this looks nothing like it. We have our own custom navigation section across here that, but this is still Django admin underneath, and all of the third-party ecosystem of Django applications that all provide their own integration with Django admin, if we go off and create our own CMS interface or our own e-commerce interface, you've completely disrespected the developer who's building these sites, because they can no longer leverage all these third-party applications that hook into the administrative interface. You've completely disrespected your customer. You've now provided them with two management interfaces. Here's our cool, slick custom interface for doing the specific stuff that we want you to do. And for all the other stuff that we didn't have time to integrate into our homegrown admin UI, you have to go and log into the Django admin, the Spartan-looking Django admin, to do stuff there. And I mean, it's my personal opinion, and this is a hot topic, but it's very wrong. And so Mezzanine really strives to leverage the Django admin. We make it look beautiful. There's this project called Grappelli. If you're in the Django admin space, you would have heard of it. It's just a nice skin, right? And we forked that way back at the start 4 or 5 years ago, and we took out parts we didn't need, and we've integrated it tightly with Mezzanine. This doesn't look too much like Grappelli anymore, apart from the colours and things like that. So we make a beautiful Django admin. We take it well beyond a CRUD interface, and this is all very possible if you know all the documented hooks and the undocumented hacks, and you're persistent with doing that. And so yeah, Mezzanine makes a very distinct choice in all these trade-offs of how to provide the management UI, and I think we really make the right one there. So that's how that's how Mezzanine's implemented in terms of the content models, how you build your content, how we provide the administrative UI. Next up, I want to talk about a concept in Mezzanine, which is batteries included. So this is a subjective thing, right? You know, the whole Unix philosophy, and particularly with Node.js, I don't know if you've delved into that ecosystem much, but they have a gazillion little, they brag about the number of packages in their Pipey equivalent. I think it's called NPM, and but most of these packages are like, here's a function to reverse a string, right? Like lots of little tools. And some people prefer this model, right? Unix philosophy, lots of little tools that do one tiny thing really well. Python, the standard library, batteries included. Django, monolithic framework, batteries included. All of the features that you need to develop a website. And there's a beauty of this batteries included philosophy. You avoid all the friction of having to bring all these dependencies together, and the hardest part in software development is obviously communicating with other human beings, right? And you avoid all this friction in bringing together different dependencies and getting them to work right. Whereas with Python, you get this beautiful standard library. It all works together nicely. Same with Django, right? Their ORM, their templating, everything. They control the whole ecosystem. They control the whole framework around that, so they can make that work nicely. We do that with Mezzanine as well. We have sort of this arbitrary point of if 75% of content-ish / B2C consumer websites need this feature, and we can implement one that's good enough in a simple enough way, we will include it in Mezzanine. And so we have this real batteries included philosophy. And another thing with Python and Django and Rails and Java and things like that, right? Back in the day, at least in my background, we came from web development was, it's like this fantasy land, right, where everything was so simplistic. I write a bunch of PHP scripts, I FTP them up to a server, and it's done. And the URLs map directly to the PHP scripts, and it's so crude and simplistic, but it's got this charm to it. And sometimes I miss those days, right? Deploying Python and Django, it's really hard, right? It's so fun to build the sites, and the technology is so elegant and powerful, but to deploy these things, there's so many components involved, and so many things can go wrong. Same with Rails and things like that. And the sort of double-edged sword with Mezzanine is that new guys come along from PHP or whatever, and they're like, I want to learn Python, that's cool. I want to learn Django, that's cool. oh, I've still got to learn this and build my site, right? They see Mezzanine, that in one command you install Mezzanine and your site is there with all these features already. And so we get a lot of people come along who've never touched Python, never touched Django. And so Mezzanine recognizes this, and we strive to empower the non-Python developer to get up and running in Python development very quickly. And so Batteries Included is something that tries to solve that. We don't want them to have to go and source all these different third-party libraries. We want to provide a holistic thing that they can just use. So I'll talk about some of these batteries we've got. Django provides this generic content types library that basically allows you to glue all sorts of different models to other models in this abstract way. So we leverage that. We have this package, Mezzanine Generic, and it gives you things like keywords that you can plug into any model, ratings, so you might have a blog post and users can rate it and things like that. Threaded comments, Django provides this fairly simplistic comments app, which they're actually going to get rid of, which is really unfortunate. We extend that and we make a nice threaded comment discussion system, and we actually can hook those ratings into the threaded comments. So all of those can be plugged into anything else in a really nice way, and we leverage those throughout the different features of Mezzanine. Django has this highly looked down upon global settings object that's it's got some design problems, and we don't try and fix that. We basically take that bad thing and we just roll with it and make it 100 times worse. But there's Django conf settings, we have Mezzanine conf settings, and all of the Django settings, the way you'd normally access those, you can access those via Mezzanine conf settings, but you can also register these editable settings that are accessed in the exact same API via Mezzanine conf settings. And the difference with those is you give them a data type, a default value, whether it's editable. And for the ones that are editable, we actually expose the settings interface in the Mezzanine admin. So you can go in and put, what's the title of the site? What are these authentication keys for connecting to some service? All those types of different things. And Django/Mezzanine applications, the third-party apps, the ones that are in Mezzanine itself, they can all register their own settings. And so we've got this little settings framework built on top of the bad Django comp settings. We have our own integrated search. If you're in the Django space, there's a cool project, Haystack. It's for Django, and it abstracts away Elasticsearch, which is great technology. I use that on some other stuff. Solr, and all these powerful sort of Java enterprise search APIs. But in my experience, for the types of sites that Mezzanine's aim towards, your basic e-commerce, anywhere from 10 to 1,000 pages, a simple SQL search where we provide some nice features on top of that, like search operators must include this exact term and or this phrase, or things like that. And that hooks into all those sort of building blocks that I was talking about before. So if you follow those Mezzanine building blocks, you get search straight out of the box. We provide all the front-end user account registration and things like that, so you can develop, you can create profiles. So I want to capture the birthday and the country and the age and favourite movie of all my front-end website users, right? And you can develop features around your website that require a user to be authenticated. So all the stuff around that, lost password, managing those users, expiring accounts, things like that. Multi-tenancy is a really hard problem in the Django space. Django provides this sites framework where you can sort of store the data for a bunch of different sites in one database, but you still kind of need to deploy separate instances of each site. So Mezzanine uses this, some people call it a hack in the Django space, but we actually scaled it to one of the largest traffic systems in Australia that's published 200 websites, where we allow a single deployed instance to host the content for hundreds of different sites. So we handle that multi-tenancy problem as well. Image thumbnailing is just a bog standard feature of CMSs. We can resize images on the fly, things like that. We provide a really comprehensive caching set of tools. The background of Mezzanine is these simplistic content sites, so not complicated web applications. Lots of content, thousands of pages that are fairly quite static, right? But they're still being read from a database. And we're dealing in Australia with like these really high traffic sites, big customers. And so we use this caching technique in Django called two-phase rendering, where typically you'll build a website and some part you'll profile the bottlenecks and some part will be slow, and so you start wrapping caching around that. We actually do the opposite, right? We make the assumption that 99% of the site, if not 100, is cacheable. So we cache the entire site using Memcached or whatever, and we actually provide these tiny little tags that you can then go into the relevant sections and you can say, I don't want to cache this part. So a case of that might be you just show the user's username at the top of every site, right? Whole thing will be cached. You wrap that one little bit in these tags, and that will never get cached. So that's really powerful and saves you a lot of time when you're dealing with simplistic, content-heavy sites that are going to get high amounts of traffic. We also use this technique called mint caching, which basically, you have this problem where if a piece of content that expires in the cache and a gazillion people hit that at once, they're all going to hit the database. So this mint caching technique means that there is always a value in the cache for a particular site, and when that gets invalidated, it doesn't remove it from cache, it just sends off a signal that says we need to update this in the cache, and then that happens, and everyone's always getting a cache version, but it does get updated, which is really cool. The actual front end, again, some of these CMS projects, and this is something that really draws people to Mezzanine, and you saw the screenshot before of the default site. We provide a whole site out of the box. You start a new Mezzanine project, the site's done, right? And some people, they simply want a site, they don't care about the design, they don't care about the features, they just want the default features that Mezzanine provides. They're done in 5 minutes. And we provide Bootstrap CSS framework, and you don't have to use any of that. You can throw it all out. Some people don't like that, and that's cool. Thanks to Django, thanks to its templating, you can override all that and get rid of it. Plus live editing. So we have this really simple way of integrating into your templates, and this isn't Mezzanine specific. It doesn't have to wrap around Mezzanine content. It can wrap around just straight Django models where you wrap bits of content in these tags, and then an authenticated CMS user, they can actually browse the site, and they'll have placeholders all throughout the actual site itself saying you can edit this bit, edit this title, edit this piece of content here, and directly inline on the actual website itself. So that's really powerful. Then coming back to this problem of new developers coming from PHP background, things like that, again, I'll say it, Django is fantastic in the Python space in general, but the deployment is a nightmare. And there's lots of tools that are trying to ease this. There's a tool called Fabric, which basically allows you to automate a whole bunch of SSH commands remotely. And so we actually provide these Fabric files that allows you to develop your Mezzanine project locally, and you run a few commands, and if you have a Linux server, you've just got it from Linode or DigitalOcean or something like that, default Linux server, you just put in the SSH credentials and things like that into your Mezzanine settings. One command, it will provision all the software on that server, and it's very opinionated, right? It'll use Postgres, Nginx, all these things that I like, and I know work well. There's a lot of choices there, but it makes those for you. And you can go from one command to developing locally to production-ready deployed site with all the caching and Postgres tuned and things like that. So we really try and it's a bad thing as well. We shield newcomers from all those complexities, and sometimes on the mailing list I'll be like, okay, well, you've hit a problem with this, unfortunately you're going to have to dive in and try and learn about all the underlying concepts, but if it works, which it usually does, you can deploy these things really easily, which is typically quite hard in the Django space. So those are the batteries included, apart from that original sort of main page API and developing your site structure around that. All these little utilities that aren't specific to developing the structure of the site. So that's the batteries included. But wait, there's also extra batteries. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's sort of developed around the mezzanine ecosystem over the last 5 years. And I'll just quickly talk about those. So these first two, they're projects of mine, I really championed them. Cartridge is one. I started at about the same time of mezzanine, and these two projects sort of developed along with each other, and Cartridge was going to be this standalone thing, and then and as mezzanine really developed a nice API with the page model and things like that that we looked at before, it became quite obvious that Cartridge is something that would really leverage mezzanine and just become another one of these page types like the form and the rich text page I was showing before. I mean, that form example was really advanced in terms of a content type in mezzanine. This one is crazy advanced in terms of the features it provides, and the beauty of it is it's just another mezzanine page type that then extends out into like a standard Django app with all its own models and views and templates, and it's got products and product variations, the sizes, colours, things like that. Shopping cart, obviously, discount codes, promotional codes, things like that. Stock control, I've only got 5 of this left on the site, so only 5 people can buy it. All the orders and the user being able to manage their orders and sales reporting on that. And again, it's all just straight Django concepts that hook straight into mezzanine. There's no special mezzanine API that had to be leveraged in order to put that together. Drum is not really a forum, but forum was the best sort of way you could come up with describing it. I love Hacker News and Reddit. They're like the Roman Colosseum of the tech age. You go there and watch people duke it out and things like that, and it's a bit of entertainment. But I love this model of crowdsourced content and voting up links and voting up comments and things like that. And I was thinking about it one time, and I thought, just going back to those batteries, there's a lot here that goes beyond just like a typical content site. There's a lot of, this is a real big toolkit that Mezzanine provides for building all sorts of different web applications. So I thought, how hard would it be to build a Hacker News Reddit clone using just those tools in Mezzanine, the threaded comments, the ratings, and extending those. And I wrote this big blog post about that, so that's a really interesting read if you like that. And it was very little code to take all the Mezzanine bits and make a Hacker News clone with that. Again, and last point, WordPress, one of its biggest selling points, there's 50 gazillion million themes out there, right? People come to Mezzanine and they're like, hey guys, where's the themes? We need to make some nice themes for this. So Josh Cartmel, another huge superstar in the Mezzanine community, he's come along and developed all these themes on the Mezzatheme website. And shout out to Daniel Greenfield, aka PyDanny. He's kindly set up a Mezzanine section on DjangoPackages.com. And there's about 70 different plugins that people have put together around that. So in conclusion, Mezzanine, it's very simple, very simple. It's opinionated, it makes a lot of choices for you. A whole bunch of batteries included. But at the end of the day, you come along and you're just doing a Django project. It's really geared towards Django. And we must be doing something right, because these are all these beautiful websites that people have developed using Mezzanine. That's just a small subset. In fact, I picked the top ones that look good. But yeah, there's tons of stuff going on. So, and that's it. Thank you very much for listening to me rant on about my pride and joy.
Okay, thanks, Steve, for the excellent talk and the excellent job of Mezzanine. I'm sorry, but we just ran out of time, so I think we really don't have time to take questions right now. But Steve will still be here for quite some time this afternoon, at least. So if you have any questions or you just want to line in the queue to take pictures with him, please find him here. Thank you.